Welcome to the course on creating the winning team. We're going to talk today about teams, collaboration, and the integrated design process. The image here is the winning team from 2017 Solar Decathlon, the Swiss team, and this was their winning design, impressive performance, very interesting design. So we'll introduce ourselves before we get into the content. My name is Tom Hoopman. I'm Associate Principal and Integrated Design Lead with Integral Group. I'm an architect, and I specialize in really high-performing buildings, zero-energy buildings specifically, and my background is in integrating architectural and engineering solutions around those type of buildings.
And I'm Janica McFeely. I'm an associate here at Integral. I'm also an architect. I practiced for about 8 years at a local San Francisco firm and then moved into sustainability work at the higher education level at the University of California, and have been back with Integral on the sustainability consulting. So I do a lot of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing integration in regards to achieving our sustainability goals, as well as policy work, master planning, and more holistic sustainability planning work. So really excited to be with you today. Yeah,
we're excited. I should also mention, I showed this Swiss team in that project, partly because were a winning team that year, but I was on the engineering jury for that project, and it was really inspiring to see the student work and the commitment and just the level of excellence that the students brought to that problem. So I'm so excited that we could share some of our expertise and experience and help teams get better and better on the Solar Decathlon side. So let's launch into our material. We'll start with the agenda so you can see how we're structured today. It's kind of a three-part agenda, starting with a discussion on teams, and that's sort of that's like the building block for all this is have to have a good teaming strategy and work well as a team. And then the next layer outside of that is the collaboration skills and techniques, and then that leads to the third tier, and the last piece is really integrated design process. So we're going to kind of work through those three pieces of the agenda.
So what does it mean to be on a team? And I think this is something that I really missed in my architectural education, assuming there's a mix of student backgrounds out there, but I think higher education doesn't always allow you to work in teams as much as you experience in the working world, and certainly on a project as complex and as integrated as the one you're about to embark on. So we wanted to talk about just good practice team structure, and I think this applies to building project, design project, but also any other project you'd be working on with other people. And teams are made up, obviously, of individuals. It's more than one person. That's a very basic definition, with different strengths. And I think acknowledging those different strengths is really the key to making a team work. Obviously, all of us come with our own skills, our own strengths, our own weaknesses, whether they're acknowledged or not. And some might be more detail-oriented and really want to get in the weeds on something, while somebody else might be the big picture thinker and never want to get into the detail. And then there's somebody else who's really trying to build the relationships within the team, and acknowledging that all of these skill sets are what's needed to make a team effective is key to success, really. And I think acknowledging that we are each individuals and come with our best intentions to a project and may just have a different approach is also really the key. So a detailed person, as I mentioned, getting down the weeds, this may be sort of a weakness, seen as a weakness. It can be a strength, it can also be a little weakness because they get distracted by getting too detailed. Or a big picture thinker that really doesn't want to finish tasks, just wants to kind of spark them and move on to the next big picture thing. And then somebody who's a team player maybe just needs a little bit more focus on where they can really help. So looking at figuring out how to really motivate and elevate team members to perform at their best. So then you have increased capacity, increased innovation, that together you are creating more than you could on your own. And there are so many different ways to think about team strengths. And I think it's really interesting, especially we're in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and also other sort of corporate models are looking at individual strengths as actually a hiring procedure. So some companies use Strength Finder or other tools to actually evaluate applicants to understand how they might fit into their team, with an acknowledgement that we are more inclined to gravitate to people who are like us, which may actually not be the best thing for your team, that we need a diversity of strengths. So there's a ton of models out there. This is just one. We'll talk about a couple more. And really this presentation is structured so that there's links in here that you can go check out and get more detail on. There's lots of tools online if you want to do some self-assessments of you and your team to really see, make sure that you have a balance, at least, of those more detailed folks and less detailed folks. So these types of tools just kind of start to name the types of people that might be on your team, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but that there's characteristics of those people, that there's strengths, weaknesses, and things they do and don't like to do. So figuring out, okay, am I a big picture thinker? Then really letting me do that. Am I detail oriented? Giving me the things that really need the research can be helpful in terms of outlining your process and the way that your team will work together to crack this nut of your project. There's some really fun ones like superpowers. This is more, again, kind of on the self-assessment, but could be used as a team project too, to just help understand your own strengths and weaknesses. And I think it also really helps you then build up your own self-knowledge for your future roles in the workplace. Because if you actually have that self-awareness about what you're good at, and you're always going to get the interview question of, what have you been challenged by, or what do you think is your greatest weakness? Like being able to talk to those things in a way that is actually demonstrating your self-awareness and your ability to address that, or what you've been able to work on, is powerful.
So the other part of creating a successful team, after you've kind of identified your strengths and weaknesses and how you all kind of fit together and can work together, is moving towards being a really high-performing team. And so this idea of there's many reasons teams are dysfunctional, and a functional team is basically they can complete a task, but you're looking to be a really high-performing team. And one way to think about that is being an accountable team, because where accountability is usually the slippery slope where teams then get into conflict, disagreement, or communication breaks down, and having a clear kind of roadmap of how you understand and deal with accountability for individuals and across the team is important. A good book on this, we'll try to provide resources for further reading and further research, but this Revolutionized Teamwork is really about creating accountable teams. And a summary of some of the content in that book, the things that you look for in an accountable team is, a clear and commonly accepted purpose, right? And a way of measuring or determining whether or not you're achieving that purpose. So we'll talk about some of those tools too as we get into this. Competent people. So do you have talented people with those diverse strengths and weaknesses, those good superpowers? A capable process, and we'll talk about managing the process as a team. A shared fate. You will have a shared fate, and it'll be that'll be a poignant part of this process for the Solar Decathlon. And you deal with issues together, so you're not back talking and side channeling. You're comfortable enough where you deal with it all together, and you get to that point, and that's really a strong relationship. And you're at each other's back, so you're behind each other. You want everybody to succeed. So those are the characteristics of a really accountable team. Another way to think about it is kind of mapping out your expectations. So we'll talk about doing that as well, and a process for doing that, and checking back regularly to see how reality is matching up with that, right? So you can imagine often expectations grow over time, especially if you do good work, but sometimes it's hard to keep up with if expectations are growing. So understanding our expectations changing and how's reality mapping against that. But also reality doesn't always meet. Sometimes we'll exceed our expectations and sometimes we're under. So by evaluating as a team, are we meeting our common accepted expectations? Where are we short? Is a real strong way of closing that accountability gap and understanding then what you need to change and what you need to do to bring what's actually happening closer to the team's expectations.
And aligned with that framework, Google did a 2-year study to try and figure out what makes a great team. And it's really not that, it's not rocket science. It probably shouldn't have taken them 2 years, but their study I think is fascinating, and the links there go into a bit more detail. And it's very similar to what Tom just presented, but I think the key for me here is the psychological safety piece, and that sounds maybe a bit ominous, but I think it's really just that I feel safe to take risks, that I'm not going to be judged by my team members, that nobody's going to be talking behind my back about my performance, that things are out in the open, that really allows the innovation to rise up and allows people to throw out the crazy ideas that might just be the key to your winning project. So that's sort of one thing that just stood out to me is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like when the best work that I've done have been on teams where I felt really safe to participate. And dependability, clearly, if everybody's showing up and doing their best work on time, that makes other people motivated to do the same. If one person slacks off or another person just decides that they're not going to show up to a meeting, it just starts to disintegrate from there. That you have structure and clarity around your process and how your team is going to perform this process, and that the roles are also clear. And meaning, a shared sense of purpose. Like we are meaning-driven beings, that we don't like doing things that we don't like, basically, or that don't have meaning to us. It doesn't motivate us. We want to have impact, especially if you're involved in this kind of project. I'm guessing you care about having an impact in the world. So all of these kind of components really can help bring your team together when you help structure the process. So some sort of tools to do that here are right at the beginning is agreeing on how you will, having some shared agreements on how you will address conflict, because it will come up. It's part of that psychological safety piece, that you agree that you're going to address things as soon as they happen, that you're going to avoid blame and take responsibility for your own part in it. That kind of what I mentioned before, the assuming good intentions, that all of us are coming into this with the idea that we want to do our best work, and we're not, nobody's here to cause disruption, basically, that if there's some upset, there's a vehicle for us to work through it together. And that can take empathy to understand somebody else's side of it. And if something's really triggering, take the space, take a breath, and come back when temper's cool, and use your team to help work through things. Don't necessarily, those two people are having the issue, they need to work it out. Use your team to actually help work through conflict. I'm sure all of you have very different tools that you've used to address conflict as it comes up, and just listening is a key one. Listening without interjecting. And you can't change people. That's very obvious in this day and age. It won't work. But understanding through empathy and listening can help bring people to the same level on a table. Also agreeing to how you're going to communicate and interact. And I would suggest writing up these shared agreements. We're going to talk about a charter in the next phase, but in some meetings with some facilitation work that I've done, we just have a big Post-it, and we, at our very first meeting, collaborate on what our shared agreements are going to be for the meeting and for the work we're going to do together. And then we put that poster up at every meeting we have, just as reminders, with the invitation that anybody in the group can say, hey, wait a second, we agreed that there would be no phone use in the meetings, and you're on your phone right now. So just not to call each other out, but just as reminders that we agreed to do this together. So let's be respectful. So certainly around being on time, part of that dependability piece, agreeing that if you miss a meeting, you'll support whatever decisions are made, listening before you speak, participating fully. There's tons of ideas you could put on here, and whatever fits for your team just can really help set the tone and also be great reminders as you're going through your process.
So one exercise that could be useful to kind of wrap up this, how you actually kind of create the team dynamic and those agreements is going through an exercise to create a team charter. So this is a team charter canvas, and it's kind of meant to be a big poster that you put on the wall, and you take a few hours and you answer these questions and you post up your answers, and then then maybe you kind of formalize it and keep this charter and sign it, and you kind of refer to it during meetings and during the process. But it can, like this charter here asks you to think about some of the things we've talked about, right? So team members, what are their roles? So what are their skill sets? What are the team values? What are the expectations of the team? So you can collectively answer all these things, get them kind of in writing and agreed upon, and then this will be your roadmap. And there, another version is this one. It's another team canvas, and you'll find several on the internet. And this one has a few different types of questions that I like. So like here you could have a place for kind of the rules, like of how you agree to work. There's more space here for those strength and weakness assessments that we talked about earlier, but also the purpose and the goals and the values are also, and the roles are also defined. So those are some pretty common elements. But a tool like this can be really useful. The discussion that it generates, and then a reminder and a document that you'll be able to refer to. So in a team structure, so this diagram is like one way to think about a project is the project is a bunch of little mini projects. So there's in a building design, there's all these little problems to solve. So trying to understand it, and this isn't necessarily all of them or the way you might want to break it up, but the idea that a building project will include structural problems and HVAC problems and envelope, design and whatnot. And then sort of understanding how you break out the project into those kind of key pieces, then you overlay a process. So we'll get into this in a little more detail, but tasks and roles and your decision-making process. So, like obviously it's going to take a certain amount of tasks to develop massing for the building, and who's involved in that, whose role is in that, how are decisions made around those tasks and that kind of problem that's being solved, and what are your collaboration process. So you want to kind of think through these sets of processes and how you map that against your project, and it gets into kind of this project management question.
Yeah, I wanted to start talking about kind of roles, and one of the key ones I think to success is the role of the project manager, which isn't that sexy of a role. It's kind of a taskmaster, really. It's not necessarily somebody who's making all the decisions. It's just somebody who's really keeping the drumbeat going for a project. And I think that identifying, if you have somebody on your team who is super organized, who likes calendaring, who likes tracking meeting notes, who will keep everybody on task and on schedule, you will get a lot further just by having somebody reminding you that, oh, we all agreed on this deliverable by this date. Have we done our work to get there? What meetings do we need to have, or what issues do we need to address before that meeting? It's I think an undervalued and if you can structure that into your team roles, it will get you a lot further. And some tools for project management, just a simple task tracker that you are all on, that you can assign to your different teams. There's tons of free tools. I'm not promoting any here specifically. I've used Asana and Instagant just because they're free, and I think they're the most simple of the ones that I've looked at. Instagant is a nice, although not super seamless, but plug into Asana so you can take tasks and do what's called a Gantt chart, or you'll see these in construction schedules, just tasks over time, basically, and you can link them so that if we don't complete this envelope review, we can't actually select our finishes or whatever the critical path item is to be able to achieve a milestone. You can see that on a schedule. And this can just be really simple as a check-in whenever you're having your weekly meetings or whatever, to look, okay, what are our tasks? Where are we in our progress? And who needs to do what to get these finished? And to keep people accountable. So any of them I would suggest that you're comfortable with, but just have everybody on the same platform.
Great. So we're going to shift to now collaboration skills and techniques, and building a good accountable team, of course, is the building block to the next stage. But now once you have that, the ways that you collaborate really, that is one of the most important factors to determine the kind of your success, right? You're going to get more if you're highly collaborative and effective collaborators. So a collaborative design thinking process, and I think this is a useful process for any kind of design project or any kind of solution or a problem you might want to solve. And you might start out with a vision or a thing you want to do, but there's sort of this process of divergent thinking and then convergence and then divergence again and divergence. But you start with the discovery mode, and really it's about reframing the problem, doing research. And if you think about it, your solution is really limited by how you frame the problem. And time invested in creatively understanding the right problem to solve is really the pathway to a more creative, innovative solution, right? So that's why this process starts with a really divergent discovery phase. And really, you're trying to see what the potential is of the project, right? So is there some untapped, some new ideas, some new potential that could be reached that isn't obvious with the original vision or problem statement? And then once you have you've reframed the problem, then you have another process where you explore solutions to those reframed questions. And it's the same kind of start big with lots of ideas, and then those get refined. And then you have a set of ideas, and then you go through a prototyping stage in order to actually test and refine and come up with then the optimal solution that you can implement. So a couple techniques for brainstorming processes. There's lots of different, I'll give you a link to some other, a website that has other tools that you can use, but this is a process that I've used during that early stage of discovery. Usually you've done some research and you've collected some data, and you bring the whole team together and use this how might we question in order to reframe the questions you're trying to solve with the design. And there's 4 steps. You start with having people independently write down on Post-it notes how might we questions that might expand the scope and the perspective that you're looking at the problem. And then when you have a time limit, say you have 10 minutes or something, then everybody shares that quickly as a group, and then you will immediately see lots of them that are the same or that build on each other. So the third step is you actually combine those common ones, or you make connections between them, and I would headline them. So maybe one is about the occupant health, and the other one's about some kind of energy idea or passive strategies. And so however they start to combine, and then you'll have you can kind of report out to the group or create a kind of a one-pager that has the how might we kind of headline framing questions that you begin your actual design process with. You can follow a similar process for actually developing design ideas once you've kind of framed the right design question. And it involves with independent work, so 5 or 10 minutes, just quickly sketch ideas to whatever that frame question is or that series of questions are. You share that with the group, and then there's a group discussion and critique, what works for people, what doesn't, what's common between different ideas or different sketches. And you can repeat that cycle a few times, and you'll converge on, basically you kind of bring everybody's good ideas, and you find all of a sudden it's a hybrid of this person's good idea, this person's good idea, and they kind of work together, and a couple cycles of this, and you've got some really strong design ideas that you can then move into the next kind of more prototyping and design development stage. So those 2 methods have a key piece that I think is important for different kind of personality types, broadly, how introverts work and how extroverts work, because each of those brainstorming examples start with working independently to write down or to sketch ideas. It allows introverts the space they need to get ideas out. And then because there's discussion and sharing, the extroverts have the more active kind of exercise where they can then explore and build on ideas verbally with group in a more social manner. And you have these cycles that allow different personality types to engage the way that you like to think and work and kind of come together. When brainstorming, I think these rules are good. This is from IDEO, and I'll reference them a couple times because they're kind of leaders in kind of that design thinking process. But 7 rules that they live by. So defer judgment while brainstorming, encourage wild ideas, build on the ideas of others. I think that's key. Stay focused on the topic. So one conversation at a time. Be visual, so draw, and go for quantity. So the prototyping stage in that design thinking process is actually pretty common to architects, right? So prototypes can be thought of as the models you build, the drawings you make. But I'd also, I guess, encourage you to think broadly about different ways you might prototype ideas. So you could storyboard, you could do a journey map or an experience map for the occupants. There's other prototyping methods might provide new insights on the design and the opportunities, but also for a project like the Solar Decathlon, the simulation prototyping, like actually taking the model and doing energy model simulations, is an important feedback and testing piece for a prototype as well. And you might even, do mock-ups and things that are tested more physically. So there's a whole range of prototyping and testing processes that you can engage in as you develop the design. So I mentioned that there's lots of tools out there. I think this is a good website. So IDEO is a design firm, not necessarily an architecture firm. But their process, I think, could apply easily to architects. And they have this design kit. So they have IDEO.org, and is a website, and that gives you a bunch of tools that you might want to try to explore different kinds of ways of collaborating and exercises to improve innovation and creativity. So some tools. Nothing beats a whiteboard. So even with how digital and virtual we are, getting in the room with a whiteboard and having people draw and sketch is an amazingly creative and useful process, and some of the best ideas are generated in a whiteboard session, I believe. So that's a useful tool. Take a picture of it, don't just erase it. You'll want to refer to it again and again. If you're so inclined to want to have more virtual kind of capturing, there's website tools such as Mural and Concept Board that allow people to collaborate kind of in a virtual whiteboard collaboration space to share sketches and documents and things like that. But it's also important to have a common file sharing collaboration space. So there's lots of free tools like Google Docs and Dropbox. Again, we're not recommending a specific one, but it's really key to having everyone access to the same files and on a common platform.
And just before I get into integrative design, I just wanted to emphasize the point of documenting your process, because not only will it help you just remember what you've done and refer back to it, be great for portfolio builders, but also it'll help in that decision making. Maybe you go down one path and then realize it's not the path you want to go down, and you look back from a few weeks previous to one of your design charrettes and you go, oh, that idea actually has more legs. So making sure that you have lots of photos and that you're filing them so you can find them again is really, really critical. So integrative design, it's basically what you're doing as this team. And it's a collaborative process, as Tom has already spoke to, that is about shared goals and high performance project outcomes in particular. So in our world, in consulting and on design projects, we talk about this a lot because it is the only way that we can achieve net zero energy projects or LEED Platinum or Living Building Challenge or any of the more complex projects that require teams to work in a different way than typical practice. And kind of getting back to that mindset, we talked a lot about people types because it is so important, and that appropriate sort of team dynamics are really what can get you the best results. And keys to that are having an integrated mindset that is empathic and empathetic. I can't say that. Empathetic, optimistic, creative, open to ambiguity. If you can be uncomfortable in the unknown, that's really an asset. That you can be vulnerable when you don't know something and ask a dumb question. That you can think whole systems so that you're not just focused on the one thing, you're thinking big picture. And that a T-shaped person, which is actually a new term to me that Tom and I talk through a lot, but it makes sense. You have a broad range of interests and general capabilities, which are a lot of architects or people attracted to architecture, but you also have some deep vertical expertise. And for me, that's around sustainability and MEP coordination. But as an architect, I also know a little about a lot of things. So I think that I can help provide the big picture thinking as well as some in-depth knowledge, and working with others on a team that are like that really can bring forth some powerful results. So what are the characteristics of integrated design? Again, it's team, all around common project goals. So it's no longer about the architect's ego or the mechanical designer's ego or your ultimate client, although your client here is a little different, but everybody is working together around this project, this goal, and that elicits collaboration between the disciplines like you don't typically see. And in a commercial project, for example, you'd be surprised if you haven't worked in the outside sort of industry yet. People get very siloed very quickly, and there's a lot of pressures on team members that make that a really difficult barrier to break. But part of having shared vision and shared goals can start to eat away at those silos and really bring out the best ideas and innovations. And having iteration and feedback loops, so everybody's not just walking down their path, that it's a common shared path that has lots of byways and sideways that you're really investigating, learning, coming back, doing it again. So that you can get to that whole systems thinking, and that the performance-based piece, especially for your project, which is so performance-based, is driving the whole process, so that you understand how each decision is really impacting those performance goals. And yeah, Tom, do you want to talk to this one?
Yeah. So this is really to define kind of what we mean by interdisciplinary, but if you think about having different disciplines in the room, it's multidisciplinary, right? So we'll have a mechanical engineer, we'll have the architect, we'll have the structural engineer, and they all have their tasks. That is a multidisciplinary project. All building designs are multidisciplinary. It doesn't necessarily mean everyone's not working in a silo, right? So just because we have different disciplines doesn't really make it integrated design. Just because everyone shows up in a room to talk doesn't make it integrated design.
That's for sure.
It's a intentional collaboration between the disciplines. So this diagram kind of showing like what happens when you start to collaborate more closely and find solutions that bridge architectural and mechanical or structural and landscape or whatever, so that starts to become an interdisciplinary team when you start having those collaborations across disciplines and breaking down the silos. And then a more edgy term is this transdisciplinary model, which maybe is an aspiration. I don't know if I've ever been in a project that's been quite like this, but the idea that you collaborate so deeply that those boundaries and silos are really dissolved. I mean, that's sort of an exciting prospect. And the other part of that is that you might bring in disciplines that are not necessarily common, that are but add a whole different dimension and might change the types of solutions. So maybe bring a sociologist or psychologist or something, or who knows what. There's all kinds of different things you could bring in. And the idea is that there's sort of this new methods come out of it, or new emergent properties, new solutions that would never have been conceived in a more certainly not multidisciplinary or even an interdisciplinary process. So we talked about whole systems thinking. To be a systems thinker is really to kind of understand the way systems work, and it's really valuable in integrated design because one, you're trying to work between, like systems are interconnected, right? So architecture and mechanical are super connected, and understanding those connections as a system thinker is important, and to understand how they're nested, right? So the common behaviors or things that are part of whole systems thinking are, understanding system flows that go through systems, understanding the feedback loops. There's symbiotic relationships and emergent properties. When the parts of the whole is more than the parts, or no part could do what a whole combined can do. Like zero energy is no one solution. It's an emergent property of a whole bunch of integrated system decisions that create something really unique. So understanding those frameworks can be useful, and with that is the scale thing too, getting outside of your part. So thinking about the building, thinking about the site, thinking about how it might connect to the utility, how that might be connected to the natural landscape and the ecosystem. So it encourages you to cross boundaries more readily and find solutions more creatively. The other way to think about integrated design and being kind of performance driven is it's not always about just energy or some of the things you might commonly think, and it's useful to think really broadly about what buildings can do and how buildings perform. There's, of course, economic performance. There's sort of the functional performance. I would even consider the aesthetics part of the performance and value of the building. It can be more resilient. It can be healthier. And integrated design brings all these different performance criteria and tries to optimize them rather than just, it's not a singular focused, well, we have a zero energy building, but it's ugly and unhealthy. It's not what you want. You want to be able to really maximize all the levels of performance of a project. And
yeah, well, I think to tag on that, Tom, it's really key for an integrated process. That shared goals piece is so important that you do that at the beginning. Not only with your team charter on how do you want your team to come together around a process, but what are your goals for the project? And that might evolve. So there'd be some checking back in on those goals. But are you driven by the performance metrics? Is that what you really care about in this project? Is it going to be aesthetics? Is it going to be some other aspect of sustainability that you want to emphasize? And just a quick story from a review board that I was on for a Solar Decathlon project, where an architecture studio teams had come together to come up with a design that was then going to be selected to move forward to actually build. And they selected a design that was very much kind of the moment. It was very geometric. From my perspective, it wasn't based on the performance metrics, which for me, I saw as being the ultimate goal of the Solar Decathlon project. And it was a light bulb moment for me that actually that's not ultimately the goal. For them, it was the aesthetic and the design strategies. It may not have been the most optimum form for performance, but they really wanted to show that the Solar Decathlon project could achieve different aesthetic value and achieve its performance goals. So understanding that up front will drive your process on how you actually evaluate and evolve your design, and coming to shared agreement is key to that. Otherwise, somebody's going to be caring about performance, and the other person's going to be caring about aesthetics, and another person's going to care about materials, and you need to link those together to have an integrated project. And I think this is an example. This is one of our projects up in Vancouver, my hometown actually, that was Living Building Challenge, Pedal Certification, LEED Platinum, net zero water, net zero energy. And these challenging goals drove the entire process and required a level of integration on the team that you don't see in a typical project. But because everybody was bought into these goals, it actually happened.
Yeah, and amazingly beautiful with all that performance.
Right, with a very specific aesthetic that the architect was able to bring to it. And I just wanted to tell another quick story about my own experience on a team. Early in my career, I was lucky enough to work on this little project in San Francisco that is probably on one of the most beautiful sites ever. You can't really tell from this image, but it overlooks Ocean Beach and is a very visible site in San Francisco. It was a little visitor center for the National Park Service. And I was really excited to be part of this project and working with one of my best friends who was going to be the project architect. And it took us some challenging moments to be able to come together as a team. For her, it was her first time being in the role of project architect and lead designer. It was really stressful. We had a couple of redos on the design based on different factors. And for me, I wanted to be part of the design, but I had to acknowledge that that isn't my key strength. I love design, I have design skills, but I am not a big A designer. I care about performance more, and I care about integrating mechanical systems in a beautiful way. And we clashed heads because we were both type A personalities. And it took us a while luckily we were really good friends and committed to our friendship and our working relationship. And after those few bumps, we became such a solid team that we were able to invite in not only our mechanical and our electrical and our plumbing, but the contractor and the client team. I have never been on a more harmonious team once we worked out our issues, because we were all aligned on making this project as beautiful as we could and as passive as possible in a really challenging marine environment. And I guess I just wanted to share that story as a way of saying, even if you hit those bumps, your commitment to each other is most important, and your commitment to the project can help all bring you along a path to a really great project in the end.
So these enhanced project outcomes, right, so these super sustainable buildings are also really complex, right? So this is an example of some of the many more factors that go into a zero energy project, and they're interconnected, right? So if you change the envelope, all of a sudden the building systems might change, and then the energy use might change, and then the renewables change, you know, like just cascades. So the integrated process is really the only way of overcoming some of these project complexities where things are so interconnected. And what that results in, so we talked about sort of integrating the process, but that results in an integrated solution too. So this is one of my first zero energy buildings. It's the NREL Research Support Facility, and here's the interior of it, and everything is connected, right? So the envelope has a certain R value that makes the radiant panel work as far as load capacity. There's thermal mass and operable windows that makes the cooling system work. The workstation design has a specific color, a specific height, specific setback from the windows to optimize daylight. Even the structural engineer got in on the game and changed the direction of the decking to have less shadow and more reflection back onto the workstation. So everyone was really excited about optimizing the environment and making these sort of integrated decisions, but they're not independent. They all work together, right, as a solution. Another example is it's a similar thing where the interiors, again, have to work together. It's a total, well, the envelope, the interiors, the mechanical, it's a completely integrated solution, and this is in a different climate. And this is going for net zero energy, isn't it, at San Francisco Airport? Or
it's kind of a net zero ready target. And I think the thing to highlight here is that when you're going for high performance buildings, the architecture has to do a lot more, and is really the start of your mechanical system. So your passive strategies are reducing the loads that you need to address. So in your solar decathlon goals, this will be really key, and I'm sure you already know that. But being able to work as a team to figure these out, because again, you can't just the architecture group can't just come up with a design and hand it off to engineering. You have to be working together to come up with solutions. And in this case, you'll notice things like there's exposed floors, so the carpet had to be pulled back to expose more of that radiant surface. The ceiling plane in particular in a radiant project has to be, the mechanical designers are going to be placing your ceiling fans, which architects don't usually like. So there's just different things that the team has to come together around and give up control of in order to let the project perform as much as possible.
Yeah, and it is an iterative process, right? So it's not a linear process, and we talked about that design thinking, but you design and you test, you evaluate, you simulate, you you figure out where it worked, where it didn't, and make a change, and you test again, and then that cycle does begin to optimize around the right solution. Performance-based process, particularly like a zero energy building, and is really very much structured around an energy target and energy modeling. And this is an example of setting an energy target before design. So this was set for a town hall project before design began to start exploring and understanding with the team how we might achieve a net zero project. So you can do all kinds of things. You can understand the energy generation capacity as far as the way that links into the energy use goal, so that there's a balance there. Often you know the size of roof and the potential PV, so that's easily calculated. You could compare that to code, buildings, or other precedents to see if that's a really aggressive target or not, right? This was generated by the Zero Code tool, so that can be useful for some building types before you actually engage in energy modeling. Then, say if you have a goal and you have different, the energy pie with different end uses, there's sort of a loading order, and Jack was getting kind of to this, you really do start with the architecture. So let's just say you have your program, and you have then your site. So obviously you start with climate analysis and program assessment, and that then informs the actual orientation and the massing, and it also influences landscape. So you can't leave landscape out, because there's lots of opportunities to improve and enhance microclimates, which will play into the way you might passively cool or heat a building. And then you start thinking about the envelope and reducing loads through the architecture. And then you introduce passive strategies, and you can see on I have this little pie chart is the energy thing, and it just starts to shrink as you engage each piece. So maybe you have daylighting strategies, natural ventilation strategies, you have thermal mass, there's a variety of passive strategies. And then now you start integrating systems, and you integrate systems that are appropriate for the way you reduce the load. So you can have a really low energy, small system that goes in, and then the last piece then is the managing plug loads, as well as the lighting, and shrinking the pie, and then top it off with renewables to offset all your energy. And it's sort of like the general loading order of how you prioritize the decisions. It's all definitely integrated though. And so the simulation process, it's important to be able to model your decisions. There's lots of platforms, and from what I've seen with being on a jury of several solar decathlons, there's a lot of variation in the tools you use. So find one that really works for you. We use a variety of ones in our office. I know Energy Plus and OpenStudio is free and works with SketchUp. That could be a good option. There are other software, other tools and stuff, but having something that you feel comfortable working in and can give you good results is a key part of making good design decisions and testing it through simulation. So we've hopefully a little whirlwind tour of integrated design process, and hopefully that helps. We kind of conclude and wrap up, talked about how to build a good team and how to assess your strengths and weaknesses, how to set a team charter, how to be accountable to each other, and then how to move that solid team into a collaborative relationship, some different kind of brainstorming processes and techniques, how to be more innovative, design thinking process. Then we talked about integrated design, how to bring disciplines together, how to achieve higher project outcomes, how to test and model and prototype and simulate, and to inform a performance-based project process. So, any other wrap-up thoughts?
Well, I just want to wish you all well. Yeah. Clearly, we're doing this virtually, and who knows when you'll be listening to this, but you are amazing for selecting this project and for coming together as a team. This is an incredible opportunity, and I really wish you the best, and just hope that you really have fun with it. This is an opportunity to explore and innovate, and I can't wait to see the results.
Yeah. An awesome experience, so congratulations and good luck.